morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. How many of you all took that long, cold walk down the block? I think my feet were frozen before I made it to the place that I thought was the actual building, and then they told me to walk a little bit further. So I'm absolutely happy to be with you all today. Miles, thank you all. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for the invitation. Hope to spend the next 20 to 30 minutes with you all to really talk about this work. Not only the work that I do, but the work that you do and kind of how we can build some bridges across our opportunities and our existence. And so I was invited to come speak here today. And to be quite honest, I did not know what I was going to talk about. I did not know who I was going to be talking to, did not know what to expect. And so one of the things that I've learned, while you may not know every situation, while you may not know every group that you're walking in front of, the person that you do know is you. And so today what I hope to talk to you all about is particularly about my story and what my story looks like in the context of the country and the city that we live in. And so today we're talking about what are the implications of educational inequality for the future workforce. It's a very specific topic, and so I'm going to navigate between that space and several other conversations. Take a look up here. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And so the conversation I'm hoping to have with you all today is very much about the interrelated principles that should guide our culture, that should guide our work when we think about who we are in the context of everyone around us. Now this picture, do we know who this is? Martin Luther King. My grandmother would say Martin Luther the King. Okay? So we are here on MLK Day, a day of service. And so one of the things I often push back against when we come to these round tables and these discussions, we love to put the image of King when he's giving this wonderful speech, suit and tie. We love to talk about how much America hailed Martin Luther King for the wonderful work that he did. This is the King that they locked up, okay? It's a very unpopular discussion. He was not loved when he was ruffling feathers and changing policies and laws. He was doing things that was unpopular, okay? They weren't standing behind him and saying, great, this is absolutely what we want for the country. That absolutely was not the case. Okay, and so when we think about Martin Luther King and the work, when we think about the work that we do, in many cases it's going to be unpopular. It's going to be unacceptable. You are going to challenge some systems that have been around for quite some time. And people aren't always going to like you. They aren't going to appreciate your story as you're trying to work with them. And so one of the things we hope to talk about is how you become much more confident in your story, how you become much more confident in who you are, how you become much more confident in the work that you are called to do, even when it's unpopular. When I talk about the equation of life, we can get caught up in a lot of the complex topics about what it means to work in society, what it means to challenge systemic racism, what it means to overcome oppression on a daily basis, to deal with a world that does not necessarily like you or accept who you are. And so what I've decided to talk about is this equation of life. It really boils down to the inputs, the systems, and the outcomes. Who you are, the system you operate in, and what you hope to accomplish. And so behind this input, it talks about who I am as a person. And so one of the things I'm constantly challenging is when people hear my resume, there's often an assumption about who I am, about what my background is. So yes, it's true. I got a doctorate from Vanderbilt. Great. That means I went to school a few more years. Doesn't mean I know anything more. I probably could have got the books for a lot cheaper and read them by myself. Yes, I did go to Harvard. I got a master's in education from Harvard right after undergrad. It didn't change the fact that when I walked into a room and I had on sweats and a t-shirt, they thought I was there to set up. It doesn't change the fact that when I was at the same table with all of those people who took the same test I took to get in, and we were reading an article about black and brown children, it did not stop them from saying, I feel so bad for young boys of color who come from low-income, single-parent homes. They never asked the question if this might actually be the person sitting next to you. And so, yes, I have multiple degrees. I went to Morehouse College. One of the greatest institutions in this country. I'm sorry I have to say that. It just kind of comes with the territory. But that does not necessarily excuse me from the feeling I get when I'm riding down the street in Philadelphia and I see the blue lights. It doesn't change that feeling. It doesn't change the feeling when I walk into a store and I know the looks, I know the stares. None of those degrees or accomplishments excuses me from the reality of who I am in the society I live in. And so behind this I, this input, what you don't see is a family picture. I am careful and committed to always tell my story. To always tell people that beyond the degrees, beyond the jobs, beyond the principalship, this is who I am and this is who I was. And who I am is very much tied to where I come from, my upbringing. I'm not from Philadelphia. I'm from South Carolina. Hartsville, South Carolina. How many of y'all have ever heard of Hartsville, South Carolina? Shut up. How do you know? No, seriously, how do you know where Hartsville, South Carolina is? For those who do not know, Hartsville, South Carolina is population 7,000. Total. Guaranteed there was one high school, we all went to it. My mother went to it. Her grandmother would have gone to it, but they were segregated maybe 50 years ago. I'm so surprised that y'all know Hartsville, South Carolina. It's crazy to me. What you also see in that picture is my mother surrounded by her 4 boys. I'm the oldest of 4 boys in a single-parent home. I grew up poor. Now, I didn't grow up in the North, but one thing I do know is Southern poverty. Southern poverty is hard poverty. We don't have projects. We don't have housing authorities. We don't have the supports. If you don't figure it out with the people you call your extended family, you are out there, period. And so my mother, we lived in New York in a pretty suburban, affluent area for quite some time, and she worked for IBM. IBM, a system, a power decided they didn't want my mother anymore, and she lost her job. Quickly. We were packing up our bags in the middle of the night to drive in a Buick down to South Carolina to move into my great-grandfather's house. Instantly, I was the face of poverty, and I hated it. I was ashamed of it. I was ashamed of who I was, where I was, and the situations and circumstances I was in. I hated having to not allow my friends to come in because I wasn't proud of where I was living. We were 8 people in a 2-bedroom trailer in Hartsville, South Carolina. There wasn't room for me to say, come over and have snacks. My mother was very clear. I bought that for you all. God forbid I took a snack outside to offer my friends. Rules. We don't do that when we don't have it to share. I hated having to explain to my friends that my name, my last name, was different from my brother's last name, who was also different from his brother's last name. Because my mother loved men that could not stay around and be committed. And even my presence was not enough to keep him interested. And so this is who I am. This is what I bring to the table. So a lot of people see Harvard and Vanderbilt, and they think automatically that somehow he grew up differently. And so I want to offer to you all, never lose your story and never stop telling your story. Because what we don't want to create is a room full of exceptions. I have a hard time explaining to my students that you can also do it, because somehow they think I'm the exception to the rule. And the world would have us to believe, as black and brown people, that we are a room full of exceptions when we are successful. Because if we collectively decide that we can all be successful and that we can all figure this out, we are a dangerous entity. This picture makes people feel uncomfortable. And you should too. Your presence will cause people to feel uncomfortable. Your story will cause people to feel uncomfortable. And you need to become comfortable with that uncomfortable feeling. Never apologize for who you are. Never apologize for your story, and never apologize for what you bring into a room. What we can talk about is this system. This system, while we want to believe that it can change overnight, I'm largely in the space that I believe it won't. And somehow, we have to decide that we are going to leverage who we are as individuals to still be successful in spite of this system while actively working to tear it down and change it. I'm very honest with my students, okay? You walk up to me, I'm gonna tell you, you know what? You're 13 now. It won't be cute in 5 years. I'm willing to take this and I'm willing to deal with you on this because I'm your principal. But I promise you, the moment you leave my care at 3:15, there is a world that does not care how old you are. We live in a society that by nature of what you look like, where you grow up, the system responds to you very differently. It is just a fact. And we as a people can no longer apologize for the sins of our country. We keep trying to fake it for this generation that it's not hard. It is hard. We want to be able to say that if you work hard, everything is going to pan out. And that is simply not true. I am blessed beyond belief that my mother was actually savvy enough to figure out some pieces to really protect us from a world that was constantly out to get us. I can think very clearly about instances in my life where things could have changed completely. My 9th grade year, I was an honor roll student in the band playing football. Fight breaks out in the school. I'm actually on my way to class. The crowd pushes. A white woman, white female teacher who does not know me, turns around and only sees a black male in a crowd. I was immediately hauled off to the office. She said I assaulted her and the police were on the way. That is a moment in time that if I did not have a system of support around me, if I did not have teachers who said, no, that's not him, he would never do that, my story could look very different. My senior year, class prank. You know, we just play around. Somehow I got caught. You know, I threw the water balloon that landed on the wrong person. And they decided perhaps you shouldn't graduate. Perhaps you shouldn't walk across the stage. Even as number 7 in your class of 400, perhaps this one incident precludes you from participating in that. Moments have the ability to change people's story, their navigation, where they end up in life. Because a system will respond to your moments very differently based on how you look and where you live. And so we have to have a very honest conversation about the young people that are in this system. We have to have a very candid conversation about the intentionality behind these systems. I was fortunate to go to Vanderbilt and get a doctorate. I read some books that were talking about the state of education in 1910. And they talk about how we want to make sure the schools are more efficient, that they are structured, that classroom blocks, it is evolutionary to think about classroom blocks as 47 to 53 minutes, that kids should take these courses for a series of credits, that we should have summers off because that would allow kids time to go work in the farms and work with their parents. That was 1910. Our systems don't look much different. When you think about Brown versus Board of Education and this fight to desegregate schools, if a person read that and then walked into the schools in Philadelphia, what would they think we've been doing for the past 50 years? And so there's some intentionality behind the system. There's a way we have to look at the system over time. And then we have to really evaluate our role in the system. And so how we understand and interpret history. If you never learn another thing, understand this. The fight to desegregate schools was never about black people saying, for me to be better, I have to be next to a white person. It was about my humanity deserves and warrants the same materials that are over here, here. My humanity says I should have the same access that they have over there, here. Humanity says I shouldn't have to bus 2 hours to have these opportunities, to have these resources, to have these activities in my communities. It was never about saying that somehow I need to change my proximity to whiteness to be better. And so never feel like you have to give of yourself in order to be better. It's about figuring out how to develop self to make this system work for you. And so we've developed this idea of input plus system equals output. I use a basic mathematical equation for my students, for anyone I encounter. I think it is the most simplistic view of how we need to view our role in the world. In many cases, the system is something we don't have as much control over as we would like. And ultimately, based on who you are in this world, the system is going to give you something. For some, it's going to give more. For some, it's going to give less. That's fact. That is just what it is. And if you decide that you want your outcome to be something, and you know that the system is only going to give you this, then you ultimately have to change the input. You ultimately have to change who you are in the moment, the system, the circumstance. You have to figure out, what do I need to project to master this system to get the goal? Now, mathematically speaking, if I decide I want a 10 and the system only gives me 5, then I have to be what? 5. Now, the moment my goal changes and I decide somehow I have the faith enough to believe that I can be a 15, and the system has decided we're still only going to give you a 5, then I have to be a 10. Those around me, above me, next to me, have to make me a 10. Because this system is going to only give me 5. That is just a fact. And in many cases, we spend so much time fighting and complaining about this system. And in my position, honestly, I'm tired of the system. I am. I am so tired of complaining about people who don't want to care about me. I'm so tired of trying to make myself better for people who are not interested in my betterment. And so I've decided to focus on things that I can control. Me, who I am, what I do, what I know, the people I associate myself with, the message I give about myself, what I accept. Because ultimately, I can control the I. I can also control my goals. I can decide I want 30 and know that ultimately I need to do something different. Because this system, yeah, I give it a 5, but in many cases, these are negative numbers we're working with. In most cases, you have a hit against you before you ever walk out the door. God forbid you be poor. Minus. God forbid you be black. Minus. Don't be a woman, black and poor. Minus, minus, minus. So we are entering into a system that before I ever leave my house, I have minuses in front of me. But my goals can't change. And what I would offer to you all, the students that you're working with, the danger of the society they're living in, they're changing their goals. They're not even attempting to adjust the input. They're just deciding, the system has decided I cannot get this outcome. It's simply not for me. I work with students every day, and the bulk of my work is actually convincing you it is possible. That a kid who grows up dirt poor in a single parent home, black as midnight, as they call it in high school, can and will go off to college, graduate, get a job. Or, much like my younger brother, not go to college, get in a lot of trouble, and still make a success out of his life. That ultimately, regardless of what the system throws at me, I can decide the input. And so I would offer to you all, tell your students the whole equation. Don't just tell them how you're great, your outcome is wonderful. Don't forget to tell them about the system they're operating in. And certainly don't forget to tell them the story of who you are in this system. And what I would offer to you all, the students that you're working with, the danger of the society they're living in, they're changing their goals. They're not even attempting to adjust the input. They're just deciding, the system has decided I cannot get this outcome. It's simply not for me. I work with students every day, and the bulk of my work is actually convincing you it is possible. That a kid who grows up dirt poor in a single parent home, black as midnight, as they call it in high school, can and will go off to college, graduate, get a job. Or, much like my younger brother, not go to college, get in a lot of trouble, and still make a success out of his life. That ultimately, regardless of what the system throws at me, I can decide the input. And so I would offer to you all, tell your students the whole equation. Don't just tell them how you're great, your outcome is wonderful. Don't forget to tell them about the system they're operating in. And certainly don't forget to tell them the story of who you are in this system.
You know you could.